Hey, what's up guys? I am Jerome from the Bonsai Supply and welcome to today's video. So in this week's video, we're going to be covering another species in detail. I chose the Brazilian Braintree, which is an all-time favorite. And we're going to be covering topics such as what time of the year do I repot this tree, how much water do I give it, what type of fertilizer do I use, and how do I propagate this tree, and so much more. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Alright, so Brazilian Raintree or Chloroloicum tortum is a flowering tropical tree native to Brazil. It is an excellent species to use for bonsai as it naturally has small compound leaves. It is fast growing and very forgiving. So here are some of the reasons why I think that the Brazilian Raintree makes such a great species for bonsai. And first off, we have to talk about the trunk. That fluting trunk that looks like muscles almost on the trunk is so cool, but unfortunately, not all Brazilian Raintrees create that fluting or those channels in the trunk. So there's a rounding Brazilian Raintree, which, as the name sounds, the trunk is just rounded and it doesn't have that fluting effect. And then there's, of course, that fluting trunk, which has these channels. Now, you can tell at a very early stage, as a seedling, if it's going to be a rounded trunk Brazilian Raintree, or if it's going to have those channels, those flutings. And that's what makes it so very special, because almost no other tree that I can think of has that type of features. Now, another cool thing that I like about them is that they actually close the leaves at night and then reopen them in the morning. So they're very light sensitive, and that's also something that is very unique to the Brazilian Raintree. I like the flowers of it because they're like a little puff, they're a little white puff, and they usually come out in the late spring to early midsummer, depending on your climate, of course. And again, not all of the Brazilian Raintrees flower. Some produce flowers vigorously every single year, and some never flower. Like for instance, that big Brazilian Raintree that I used to have, that one never flowered for me. But I've had many Brazilian Raintrees that profusely flowered every single year. I like that they are super fast growing, so you can develop them in just a very short amount of time. They are very forgiving, so if you trim it back a little too hard, or if you forget a watering here or there, they tend to bounce back pretty quickly. Now, for the seasonal work, it is a typical tropical tree, so that means that you do everything to the tree at once in the middle of the summer. Super easy and straightforward. All you need is 2 consecutive nights of 70 degrees Fahrenheit plus, and wait until your Brazilian Raintree starts to actively grow. And then you can go ahead and repot it. You can defoliate it, you can style it, you can trim it, you can trunk chop it, you can do anything that you can think of, all at the same time. Throughout the rest of the year, we don't really repot it, or we don't defoliate it, or don't do any major to it. We just trim it back when the tree grows a little bit out of shape. So very easy and very straightforward. Now here's a little trick for Brazilian Raintrees. So sometimes if you don't repot it in an off repotting season, and if you've had a Raintree for a long time, you may have noticed that it might get some yellow leaves. It might not open up the leaves in the morning anymore, especially when it gets really hot. And then what you can do is you can actually look for the dormant bud. So if you move these leaves a little bit aside, and there's usually a dormant bud sitting right at the base of that leaf that's not opening completely. And so to activate that dormant bud, it's very simple. You defoliate the tree, and then the dormant bud gets activated and new leaves will be pushed out. But this is a great technique to use in the off repotting season, or if you want to get a little more ramification, branches, leaves, whatever you can think of out of the tree, use the dormant bud technique, look for the dormant bud, defoliate, and you're good to go. Now there's one caution that I would like to remind you of, is that Brazilian Raintrees, they do tend to have a little bit of a dieback. It's almost like a Japanese maple where we always cut back to that ring. With the Brazilian Raintree, we don't see that ring, but what you can do is, if you want to cut back to, let's say here, leave a little extra section, like maybe a half an inch for dieback. That section will die back and it will turn brown and really hard wood. You can clean that off and then this section, and then bring it back down to the section that you want to get to. So propagation of a Brazilian rain tree is usually done in three very simple ways, either from seed, small cuttings, or air layer. Now I tend to sow my seeds usually at the end of spring, right as we get into the summer. That's when I sow them, when I know that we don't have any more cool nights. Now obviously that has to vary depending on your climate, but if you're in a very warm climate like I am, do it when the temperatures start to heat up, sow them, put that dish out into full sun, and they will sprout very quickly and very easily. You can also propagate them from small cuttings. However, the cutting has to be thinner than like a chopstick. So they only, something like this, maybe like a 1/4 inch, maybe a little less than that. That's usually a good size that will actually take. Once you take the cutting though, keep it in like a filtered light and mist the foliage maybe 3 or 4 times a day until it starts to grow on its own. And then the last most common way to propagate a rain tree would be through air layers, which is of course one of my favorite techniques to propagate a tree, because you have instantly results, right? You can instantly air layer a big piece of the trunk and pot it, and you can just worry about the branches. Now the air layer, once again, I like to do that in the middle of the summer when the tree starts to actively grow. Good time to add on your air layer. Takes about 10 weeks, again, depending on your climate, but if you're in a warm climate like I am, it takes about 10 weeks. Now, in the care and maintenance, we're going to be talking about things such as watering, fertilizing, insects, and pests. Now, for the watering, when they are actively growing, I like to water them a lot more frequently. Also, if they are placed in full sun, they're going to need a lot more water than a tree that's placed in the shade or in a filtered area, right? Filtered light area, like underneath a canopy of another tree. They might need a lot less water, but usually I like to grow my rain trees out in full sun, and I like to water them, give them a full watering, a full soaking, especially when the temperatures start to warm up and they start to have that explosive growth. The more they grow, the more water they need. Throughout the rest of the year, if they don't actively grow, you can water them a lot less. I still water them every day, but I don't give them a soaking. Maybe I'll just give them a splash or something like that. That's something really important to keep in mind. Do not let your rain trees dry out in the growing season. So in regards to fertilizing, I like to use our all-purpose bonsai fertilizer, which is an 18-4-10. It is high in nitrogen, and that's exactly what you want for a tropical tree. Tropical trees, they don't get these long internodes or larger leaves when you use high nitrogen. Quite the opposite actually happens. They start to fill in the canopy a lot quicker. You get a lot more branches, a lot more leaves, a lot more explosive growth. That's exactly what you want. And you can apply this once a month as long as your tree is growing. So when the trees don't grow, I tend to not fertilize at all, or just give like half the dosage, because the roots can still absorb the fertilizer. But once they start to grow, I start to fertilize. And in the fall, when I would move them into like a greenhouse or indoors or something like that, and they continue to grow, I continue to fertilize. So I use my fertilizing on a tree-to-tree basis. The ones that continue to grow continue to get fertilizer. The ones that don't, they don't get any fertilizer anymore. So the Brazilian rain tree is naturally very resistant to most pests and diseases. The biggest problem with rain trees that I see would be nematodes. And you don't really have to worry about nematodes if you don't live in Florida. I think that's where they are most active, and especially if your rain tree is grown in the ground. If it is not grown in the ground and you're not in Florida, you don't really have to worry about rain trees unless you're reusing the soil from a tree that may have been affected with your rain tree. that's the way that you could get nematodes, but other than that, it's fairly uncommon if you don't live in Florida. However, even though since rain trees are resistant to most pests and diseases, I still continue to spray, like I mentioned in all of these videos, on a monthly preventative basis. And I use Tall Star as an all-around spray and Lucid as a miticide, and I go back and forth bi-monthly. So the reason why I still spray Brazilian rain trees is because us bonsai lovers, we have so many different species in our collection. And I'm a firm believer that if I have a black pine that has mites, I'm fairly certain that if the wind blows some of the mites onto my rain tree, that they might try the rain tree and might even like the rain tree. And so that's why I spray my entire collection on a monthly basis to prevent any diseases. Now, if you have any questions about anything that I mentioned here in this video today, please do so and leave those in the comment section. And if this is your first time coming across one of our YouTube videos, consider subscribing to our channel so that you're always up to date when a new video comes out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.